Hi, and welcome to InfoSec World 2023 in Orlando, Florida. I'm Bradley Barth with the Cyber Risk Alliance and Security Weekly, back with you with another interview here on the show floor, and my guest sitting next to me is Brian Contos. He is Chief Strategy Officer at asset management company CEPCO Security. Brian, thanks so much for being here today. And as always, let's jump right into things. I know you just had a presentation earlier this morning, which I got a chance to view, all on the concept of asset intelligence. So let's start with that. Define asset intelligence. What types of information falls under the category of asset intelligence, and where are some of the biggest gaps for organizations in their asset intelligence?
Sure. So asset intelligence, asset management, chasm, these are terms that have been around for, probably since the beginning of the cybersecurity industry. But when I think of asset intelligence, what I like to do is say, consider your devices, your laptops, your servers, the applications that run on them, the users that interact with them, the vulnerabilities they might have, and that device might be on site, it might be in the cloud, and then correlate that all together. So don't think of an asset as a single machine, think of it as all the interrelated parts that make up that machine and everything it communicates with.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about what are some of the factors that can make asset management and asset intelligence so difficult for an organization to aggregate and meaningfully interpret.
Yeah, so scale is definitely a big issue today. If we talk about cloud assets and BYOD assets and XIOT assets, in addition to all the apps and identities that fall into the equation, just handling the volume can't be done the way it used to be, which sadly was with spreadsheets and other archaic approaches.
Yeah.
So today, organizations say, well, scale's an issue, but also a big problem is considered deduplication. And if I pull in information from a CrowdStrike and an Automox and a Lumio and Microsoft Active Directory and Tenable and all this, I just say, okay, here's all my assets, I might have massive duplication. Mm-hmm. So deduplication, which then leads to correlation analysis, that's really where people want to get to. And without automated tools, it's almost impossible to get to that point.
Yeah, plus ecosystems are just becoming a lot more complex, right? A lot of organizations using all sorts of different types of devices, endpoints, things like Internet of Things and connected devices make things complicated. The era of BYOD particularly exploding with remote workers, all of that I have to think contributes as well, right?
And that's right, Bradley. And what you find is XIOT devices, whether it's a voice over IP phone, digital door lock, security camera, there's about 3 to 5 of those per employee in an organization. Mm-hmm. So 10,000 employees, 30 to 50,000. That's just things, right? Mm-hmm. Then we have all the cloud assets that could get spun up and spun down every minute or so. Mm-hmm. All the identities, it's a lot of complexity. Yeah. So what we find at CEPCO is being able to boil all that asset information down into what are actually the tangible assets, what are the interrelated parts, and what's their state and presence. And what I mean by that is, presence is telling me, yes, I have a security control on this device, I have a patch management control, it's in Active Directory, that's the presence, but the state further goes on to say, well, your security control hasn't communicated with the management console in 3 weeks, or it's 8 versions too old, right? So now I know presence and state, so I can actually measure the security prioritization of my devices predicated on knowing all that rich asset intel, which I wouldn't get just by looking at a single solution that's not correlated.
Yeah, in your presentation you talked about the idea of that organizations need to move away from assumption-based asset intelligence and move toward more evidence-based asset intelligence. Explain a little bit what you meant by that.
Yeah, so assumption-based is what we've all done, quite honestly, for the last 20 years when it comes to asset intel. I assume my security controls are all working. I pray that everything's deployed accurately. I hope that I'm not missing a specific control on a specific device. And the reason we did that is we didn't really have any good ways of not approaching with the assumption-based. It was just very manual, very chaotic, and very error-prone. Evidence-based flips that on its head. It says, look, instead of assuming these things, let's have evidence. Let's actually know empirically what's running. If it's running, is it up to date? If it's up to date, is it actually working across all of your security, all of your IT and all of your GRC controls. And this is great for security, of course, but it's also great for IT operations, for things like licensing rationalization, understanding how I have observability across all my assets, and finally GRC. You look at PCI, you look at CIS, you look at NIST, OWASP, they all talk about know what you got, know how it's running, and know if it's secure. That's always step one. But we've assumed that stuff has been working for 20 years. Now we have evidence what is and what isn't working.
Yeah. All right, let me play the role for a minute of the not particularly savvy business CEO that is hearing some of this and saying, oh, I mean, I get it. It's important to have visibility into your assets, but what's the harm of one rogue endpoint or device here or there? What's the worst that can happen? What is the worst that can happen?
Well, that's exactly what the bad actors want you to do. They're counting on you being passive. They're counting on you saying, what worked for us the last 20 years is going to work for the next 20 years, and that's putting you in this very precarious position. I would also say to that individual, look, you've spent millions of dollars on CMDB, SIM, SOAR, ticketing solutions. Wouldn't it be great if the asset intelligence that flowed into them was accurate, that you had a source of truth, so you're making decisions predicated on real evidence-based data, not garbage in, garbage out. I think you'd say, hey, if I'm spending millions of dollars, I'd sure like to make sure it's based on real time, actual quantitative and qualitative metrics that are measurable, and not just garbage.
Yeah, and that was part of your presentation as well, that you were talking about that quality asset intelligence can feed into this bi-directional architecture that can help you improve your overall enterprise security intelligence. So just explain maybe a little bit more about what some of the benefits can be there. What can you learn from having that kind of an architecture?
Well, what's really neat about this architecture, first off, is it's super easy to deploy and extract this data. So because everything's API based, it's cloud centric, you can make API calls to dozens and dozens of devices, get up and running in less than an hour. And that's great, you do analytics, queries, reports, so you've got this solution. But then it actually feeds upriver into all those other solutions, like we mentioned, CMDB, SIM, SOAR, ticketing, so on and so forth, that you're spending a lot of money on. So it's that bidirectionality of asset intelligence, that need for everything in your environment to have a good sense of truth, that makes this so critical and quite honestly so foundational to security, IT ops, and GRC.
Yeah. Are there any particular devices or endpoints or assets that in your experience have proven to be especially elusive to organizations, something that's not quite so visible or maybe just kind of gets outright forgotten?
You know, something that's interesting is that everybody's familiar with their EDR. Whether they've got CrowdStrike or Cylance or Carbon Black or whatever solution they have, they go, okay, I know I have endpoint security. What we find is that organizations have both too many and too few licenses for these devices at the same time. And what I mean by that is they might have purchased 50,000 seats of CrowdStrike, and that's great, but when we find out and we correlate everything with Active Directory, we find out you have 65,000 solutions, of which 60,000 could be running CrowdStrike and only 50,000 are. So we see a lot of gaps. And what this helps do is, one, ensure that, yeah, I've got security controls, but two, for the folks actually writing the check, they want to make sure that what they're buying is actually getting used. It doesn't help anybody, maybe the vendor, but it doesn't help anybody usually to have excess licenses sitting in a drawer. And that's one that people intuitively get. I have a bunch of EDR, but when they start seeing the gaps and it's visualized, like, wow, I had no idea we had 200 systems sitting in that building that lack any kind of security, and if just one of them is compromised, we're completely at risk.
Yeah, interesting. Now, during your presentation, you also talked about some of the most beneficial use cases for asset management. So talk about those a little bit. What facets of your business or organization can really get a nice turbo boost from having a quality asset intelligence program? Yeah,
and it's funny, there's probably about 20 or 30 different use cases off of the top of my head across security and IT ops and GRC. But security, one of them that's really interesting, and it just sort of started popping up maybe the last couple of years, is called vulnerability hunting. Now, it's not threat hunting. We're all familiar with threat hunting. It's an incident response type role. It's reactive, where you say, I believe a bad actor's gotten access. I want to see what damage they've caused, what information they pulled out. looking for IOCs and TTPs. Okay, that's known. Vulnerability hunting is proactive. Before the bad actors get in, I want to get a sense of where are all my critical assets, what are the risks on those assets, are they running end-of-life software, do they lack patches, is there no more extended service contract? But then back to what I said before, presence and state, maybe I have the EDR deployed, but not patch management. Maybe I have patch management, but not segmentation. Maybe one of those tools is you support N-2, so it could be 2 iterations old, but this one's 10 iterations old. And these guys over here haven't communicated in over 6 months. Well, these are all factors I need to know so I can quickly take this massive picture of assets, prioritize and say, hey folks, today, these are the 10 assets that we have to go address right now. There's another 300 we have to address, but these are the ones that are super critical because maybe they have customer sensitive data, we're going to go through a PCI audit, whatever the case might be. And that really helps. So I really like the idea of vulnerability hunting. From the network ops side, it really comes down to rationalization. Just give me visibility. Let me know what my licenses are, and let me optimize all those investments in those SIMs, SOAR, CMDBs. And then from GRC, the biggest one is continuous monitoring and reporting. I don't just want to have this data, but I want to be able to placate auditors, if you will, to say, hey, if you want to check where we are, our state of security, here's the report. Here's a export of everything that you just asked for, and you can get it in real time, not a 6-month exercise to go fact finding and do surveys. It's just there. And man, that makes every kind of regulatory mandate so much easier to handle.
We have just a little over 3 minutes left, and in that time, I'll throw out one last question to you, which is, in this particular area or field of cybersecurity, you kind of hear about a category of solutions called asset management solutions.
Yeah.
Other people say there's a category of solutions, attack surface management solutions. Are they all kind of just cousins of each other and similar, or is it kind of 6 and 1/2 dozen of the other? How does attack management versus attack surface management differ, or how do they overlap?
Yeah, the terms are always used interchangeably. I think asset management might be the legacy term, cyber, asset, attack surface management, whatever the new flavor is. We just call it asset intelligence at CEPCO. But fundamentally, the approach today is, I don't want to install agents. I have to have a cloud native solution. It has to be highly scalable, and it has to be super easy, not just to deploy and use, but to get value from. A lot of the legacy tools, they would take quarters, years to deploy, and they were very error prone, very manual, and you had to do a lot of corrective sort of processes to get them to work. Nobody has time for that today. Just because with the number of assets, it simply can't scale, and the impact it puts on your team, it means that they can't focus on other more strategic goals. They shouldn't have to sit around counting assets all day. So I believe this new generation, if you will, asset intelligence that's coming out, it's all about being scalable, it's all about being easy, and it's all about being fast and effective.
Great. Well, I appreciate you leading us through this discussion today, Brian. For more information about CEPCO, please visit the Security Weekly website, securityweekly.com/CEPCO, SEVCO ISW. Thanks again, Brian. Really appreciate it. Brian Contos from CEPCO Security. Thanks for joining us, and to everyone else, please keep watching for more live and on-demand content from InfoSec World 2023. I'll see you all later.